learning with respect to how to better apply this in practice as you grow as teachers. Okay, so I kind of went off the cuff a little because I know I've read the exact words twice to people, but that contained everything. With that, we're going to start today's course on the diaphragm. I have this cool little picture of me and Angie with the diaphragm, and I forgot to put it on the slide. So instead, we're starting with the first picture of the diaphragm. I looked for it real quick, but it's on my Google Drive, so it's going to take the time to download it. So here's the diaphragm. I don't know if this image makes sense. It should make sense by the end, but this is the most classic image of the diaphragm that people look at. And what you're looking at is the underside of the diaphragm, which is where we will start. Well, I'm going to go through everything first, and then we're going to start with the underside because that's where the last two classes spent all their time. I don't think we actually traveled above the diaphragm in the past two classes. So, and that was on purpose. These three classes have been organized to be sort of like a three-part series to begin some of the most important relationships in anatomy regarding yoga. And that's something that we got some feedback on, and I'd like to spend some time at the end, if I get through all this, which I should be able to, talking more about yoga, but I think it might be something Angie and I want to talk about developing workshops for. And some of the ideas we had were literally going through the asana and at each stage of the postures talking about what the relationships are. It's very specific, but it's a little easier to tackle than to try and generally speak about how this is important in yoga in a way that's going to mean anything to you. I mean, we will talk in general about it, but the details really elaborate like a lot of the importance. So anyhow, you're looking at the underside of the diaphragm. This is the spine. You have two large tendons that relate to these portions of the diaphragm, which are called the pillars of the diaphragm. And they are what attach the diaphragm to the spine itself. And you can notice that the attachment is very broad. So it attaches up here, but the tendon continues like a big piece of duct tape, I like to call it, down many vertebral bodies. It's not always the same in every individual. It is always higher on the left than it is on the right. And it always extends further on the right than the left, but we'll talk about how that's not exactly true in a little bit. You then have a big arch here between the two pillars. You have a small arch here between the body of the vertebra and the transverse process of L1 or sometimes T12. It does happen. And that's called the accurate ligament internus. So that is the space for the psoas. Remember, the fascia iliaca basically blends into that arch, that ligamentous arch. The second arch you have out here is the lateral or external accurate ligament, and that is the quadratus lumborum. That is what the quadratus lumborum actually attaches to. The psoas passes through, if you remember, and has attachments above the diaphragm, but the quadratus lumborum uses that as its tendinous extremity, so it's where the muscle attaches to pull. This here is the 12th rib, and so the quadratus lumborum also has attachments directly to the 12th rib, but some of its attachments are only directly to this ligament. Everybody talks about it being the 12th rib. And then you have this arch here, which is between the 12th and 10th. I'll show you later a better picture of that because I think it's actually coming very soon. The next important structure is, and then it attaches directly across the ribs. So remember, it's not traveling along a rib, it's actually jumping one rib to the next on the inside of the thoracic cage, and then it attaches directly to the costal cartilage, and we'll talk about what all of that is here in a minute, and runs up to the xiphoid process. So those are the muscular attachments. They talk about it in three parts. They talk about the anterior dome in front of this big tendon. They talk about the posterior dome behind the big tendon, all of this, and then they talk about the two pillars of the diaphragm. This tendon, the central tendon, is talked about as having three leaves. It has the right leaf, it has the left leaf, and it has the middle leaf. And then within the central tendon, you have an opening, and we're going to talk about the openings a lot here in a minute, so I'm not going to go too much into that. This is what the right side, I like to show the right side because it's very exaggerated, because the heart isn't as on top of it, and it raises up higher than the left side. I'll show you that in a moment. But this is what the diaphragm looks like in the body. It's really large, and this is essentially its attachment. I mean, it's above its attachment to the thoracic cage. So it's a really large muscle that's dome-shaped, and as it contracts, it presses down, creating a more flat structure so that the lungs can inflate. And we'll talk about all that. From the side, it's important to notice that, and this isn't the best picture, I wanted to actually draw it. So here you have its attachment at the lumbar spine. Sorry about that. I don't know how I did that. Here you have it coming up and attaching to the xiphoid process. So, there it is. Here. So everybody can see that the idea I want to paint in your picture is that it creates an arch and divides a space. Now, if you cut it in different sections, you'll see that space is not perfect because, like in this, you have places where the pillar hasn't quite yet reached the lumbar spine. And I'm going to add to that picture as we go. So, the other space that's very important to understand it creates is the larger space of the abdominal cavity. So wait, this one was showing that it creates a thoracic space. And I will elaborate on that a lot in the long run. But this abdominal space we covered a lot in the past two courses, especially the last one on the fascia iliaca. And there is continuous fascia, which comes from the pelvic fascia or presacral fascia up through the fascia iliaca, up through the transverse fascia, and then becomes the diaphragmatic fascia. The diaphragm itself is like a big ring, and this is the point of this was to show you that where it attaches to the rib, for instance, in this case, the 8th rib's costal cartilage, it then, after its attachment point, you see the transverse abdominis extending out. So the continuation of the ring of the diaphragm from back to front is the transverse abdominis. I don't know which one I just said, but the muscle continues as the transverse abdominis. So as it's pulling sort of back and forward like this, you also have the transverse abdominis capable of continuing that and pulling as it's pulling forward and down, this is pulling backwards in this way. So the transverse abdominis would be this muscle. And they form like a perfect cavity, which is capable of compressing all of the organs within it and raising the pressure of that space. So so when you're looking at the diaphragm, this is once again the right side, and I'll show you the difference between the right and left. What you see is, here are the arches from the back. You can see the 12th rib. You can see the arch that the quadratus lumborum has to be attached to, because there's no way it's attaching directly to the 12th rib the whole way. You can see behind it, there is no muscles before the ribs. So the muscles between the ribs are the next layer of muscle, but then behind that, you end up having a lot of the muscles that are attaching the ribs to the spine and the pelvis and things like that. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So here's the muscles of between the ribs, the intercostal muscles. So from the top of the diaphragm, so this is from the top looking down, it can be really difficult because it looks almost like from the bottom looking up. One big difference is you have this huge space here for the pericardium. That's where the heart sits, on top of the diaphragm. You'll also notice that you have these two big attachments here, which are to the xiphoid process. And you'll notice that each time the diaphragm is attaching to the ribs, so here it has a long attachment to the ribs, here it has a short one, and then a tendinous attachment to the intercostal space. So it's not attached to a bone in that place, but attached to the fascia between the ribs and above the muscles. Here again, and then it attaches for a long time to the cartilage of the ribs. Here, and that's the most important thing to understand from the top. So, from the inside, these are the attachments. So here's the intercostal muscles. These are each of the ribs, and we're looking from the inside at the chest, like we are the heart, essentially, looking at the back of the sternum. And this is the abdominal muscles. The diaphragm is actually removed, but see these little fan-shaped cuts? That is the diaphragm. What I want to show you is that from the inside, attached to the rib, you have the diaphragm, and then directly from the same area, you have the transverse abdominis. And so that's how they form that wall in front, that functional wall in front. When they contract together, the whole space becomes smaller. That was the intention of this. Yeah. So this cut is difficult. The spine is cut in half. So what you're actually looking at is the inside of the opposite. So this is the bottom of the diaphragm, like you've cut the diaphragm here, and you're looking at the other side. And it's easy to confuse that with like you're looking at the top on this side, but you can see the ribs are behind the diaphragm. So you're actually looking at the other side of the diaphragm, and you can see how those attachments are located to the rib on the inside. That was the most important part. So here's a good image of the pillar, and you can see that as the pillar descends, it begins to blend into the fascia of the spine, the lumbar spine. So the ALL, the anterior longitudinal ligament, it literally begins to blend with that. I'll show you the importance in just a second of that. And this is the psoas and quadratus lumborum. Oh yeah, that's why I have this picture. See this little triangle here? That is the middle layer of the thoracolumbar fascia, which is the front of the quadratus lumborum, and it is the attachment for the internal oblique. And the reason why I say that is because right here you don't have a muscle. You have the thoracolumbar fascia, you have it attaching to the 12th rib, the diaphragm above it, but you don't actually, that's the accurate ligament. So what you have is the ligament, the diaphragm, the thoracolumbar fascia, and you have this little triangle where you can find it and you can literally touch through, and that is as close to the abdominal space as you can get with your finger. It is a place that you can touch the quadratus lumborum, because somebody asked about that before, because otherwise it's covered by all the spinal muscles. But I just wanted to make sure everybody understood it exists. It has a lot of importance with respect to herniations, posterior herniations, a lot of importance with respect to the function of the diaphragm and respiration, because if that is very tight or the muscles are very tight, then when you breathe into the back space, when you breathe and you're letting your lumbar spine expand especially, that space can be restricting your diaphragm's ability to function. Also, if it is weak and you're very, very tight in the abdomen or something, it's a weak point and it's a possibility to have a hernia through there. It's more rare than the abdominal hernias, but it is a potential weak point in the abdominal cavity. And did you want a picture of that? Also, I did last time, I'm not sure if everybody got the email, but we'll make sure that all these slides you have. A lot of them are in different languages and there's not the text. So the next most important thing for me to explain before we move on to more detailed information is that the diaphragm extends through the fascia of the front of the lumbar spine, and then it emerges as the sacro-recto ligaments that create the pelvic floor and contain the organs of the pelvic floor, the rectum, the genitals, the bladder, which would be here, that's the base of the bladder, and then attaches to the pubic symphysis. I should have put a little picture of that in here. There's a bunch of good ones, but you can just imagine it's just like this, except for it's attaching to each side of the pubic symphysis, not the symphysis itself, but the pubis. So when it comes back up the front through the linea alba and the fascia of the transverse abdominis above the umbilicus, you end up seeing that the tension actually creates like so it's like the diaphragm is the red. So you end up with, and I'll just draw through the bones, you end up with a circle essentially like that. So I'm not saying that is the diaphragm, but functionally you end up with a continuous system of muscles and ligaments and tendons that allow for this whole muscle to act as a single unit upon the abdominal cavity. And we'll see what the importance of that function is during respiration. I've got some videos and we'll talk about that, I think, next. So during respiration, you have this cooperation of a lot of muscles, and this is not all of them, but at this point I'm just going to show these because I think it's the ones that we understand the most. But you would have the transverse abdominis here. No idea why they would have forgotten that in this picture. You have and that's actually on the expiration side. But for inspiration, you have the scalenes pulling up on the rib cage. You have the intercostal muscles that are the external, or the ones that are more, they are more posterior, so they end here. And they start all the way back at the spine, and they pull up on the ribs. You have the serratus anterior, which is pulling up on the ribs. You have the diaphragm, which is pushing the abdomen down. For expiration, you have the transverse abdominis, which is pulling the abdomen in. You have the rectus abdominis, which hopefully doesn't do a whole lot, but it can pull the ribs down. You have the external obliques, which are very important, and they pull the ribs down. You also have the internal obliques, which pull the ribs down, and you have the internal intercostals, which start all the way forward and pull the ribs down rather than pulling the ribs up. I don't like this picture of those, but that's not important. And then you also have the muscles that are attaching, for instance, to the sternum and then to the ribs in front, and they're capable of pulling the rib cage in towards the sternum. So all of the muscles that create inspiration basically increase the size of the thoracic cavity that contains the lungs, and all of the muscles that create expiration decrease the size of the thoracic cavity. By the diaphragm contracting and pushing down into the abdomen, it increases the space above the diaphragm. And then by lifting the ribs or opening the ribs apart, it increases the space of the thoracic cavity, lifting the ribs up here. So, altogether, one of the most important functions of this unit that I was showing, well, this one in particular, and then in combination with the cervicothoracic diaphragm, by holding your breath and not letting air come out, you can also increase the pressure of the thoracic cavity, so you end up using a combination of the muscles that inspire and expire simultaneously without letting the air release. And so you breathe in, now you have as much in, you used all the inspiration muscles, and now you hold your breath and breathe out, and you can increase the pressure, which pushes the pelvic floor down, pushes the pleural dome, like the top of the tissue between the ribs, up, and it actually decreases pressure in the spine by increasing the pressure here. And you can decrease the pressure at T12L1 by 50% and L5S1 by 30%. So it's a large, you cut in half the amount of pressure that's being put through the thoracic spine at this point, between the thoracic and lumbar spine at this point, and you cut by 30% at this point here. And the importance is that that I like to mention for yoga, breathing is so important. Active breath, you know, the Ujjayi breathing. It helps to decrease the pressure while allowing respiration because you are so active, because it's not, you're not actually just letting the belly fall, but you're maintaining tension in the belly as you let it expand. But at the same time, if somebody is beginning to hold their breath and brace themselves each time they are in a specific position, it could be a sign that they're trying to engage this mechanism to protect themselves. I just think it's a good thing to be aware that then instructing somebody, it's about evaluating the ease of the position, and a part of the breath might be falling back into a little bit more comfortable posture, I think. That's my idea. And then beginning the breathing and explore if that deep you can maintain the breathing comfortably. Because it's possible that people will hold their breath not because they're forgetting, but because they're trying to protect themselves. So it's just something to be aware of. So now what I've shown is basically how all these bones in this space have this large muscle and network of muscles, but especially the diaphragm, to help regulate the pressure between the upper thoracic cavity and the lower abdominal and pelvic cavity. You really have to count them as one. Now, in that space that we have just described, you have all of these organs. There is no space, okay? So when the diaphragm contracts and moves a lot, all of these organs move a lot. It's an obligation. And so now we're going to go through what these organs look like with respect to the diaphragm. So in this picture, you see this little black line here. That is the diaphragm. In this picture, and actually they show in a less dark line the top of the right side. Here is the left side of the diaphragm. Now, if you look at this and you don't understand, you would say, wait, the diaphragm is going straight through the lung. That's because the organs are literally in the shape of the diaphragm. So the organ itself takes its shape by the space that's provided by the skeletal muscles and the connective tissue networks that surround it. It isn't like the diaphragm or the rib cage or any of that said, oh, the lung needs to be this big, I will move around it. It decided how it needed to be, and then the lung just filled the space. The lung doesn't care how big it's supposed to be. The heart, the liver, they fill the space that's provided by the connective tissue. And we'll show exactly why that's so important to understand here in a moment. But the function of the diaphragm plays a really big role in a fundamental sense, the function of the organs that it is interacting with. So we're going to go through that next. The back of the diaphragm here, you have it over the liver, you have it over the spleen. The kidneys are below the diaphragm. And now we're moving on. So I just talked about the connective tissue. This picture is to show you that these green lines here are the connective tissues, in particular the pleura of the lungs and the, why my brain isn't, peritoneum of, the peritoneum of the abdomen, and there is connective tissue on the other side that separates the muscles from the fascia of the organs, and the fascia of the organs, it's not visible in this picture, but we'll go through it in a moment, but it has three types of fascia, one that's attached to the organ, one that's in between the two, and then another one that's attached to the muscle or bone or whatever it's next to. And by doing that, it allows movement of the organ, because the organs move, they expand, contract, it's called the motility of the organ. And that is allowed to happen every time our intestines move. Our transverse abdominis isn't being pulled in one direction or pulled in another direction. The intestine's free because it has these two layers, and in between those two layers is fascia. And we showed the video last time that showed how that works. You have this connective tissue matrix that has constant tension. It's like it's measuring how much one layer moved next to the other and adapting to the needs. So the maintenance of the quality of that fascial layer is absolutely essential to the function of your organs. And adhesions between those fascial layers ends up having huge implications, not only on maybe the joints, because my liver is too tight to my diaphragm, and so now my ribs are too tight, my thoracic spine can't move, but also the other way around, my thoracic spine doesn't move, my diaphragm becomes rigid, and now my liver could possibly be restricted in its ability to move and function appropriately. So, another important thing to understand about the diaphragm are, am I corrected? Yeah, the foramen or hiatus, actually, the hiatus that are in the diaphragm. So here we're looking at the bottom of the diaphragm. Here you have the